Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I would like to start with a question to try to wake you up a bit. You had a long break, a coffee, I'm sure, so let's wake up all together. So my first question to you is, who in the audience is part of a software engineering team? If that's the case, please stand up. Come on, stand up if you're part of a software engineering team. Almost everybody, both of you at the front, I hope you are, otherwise this talk is going to be very boring for you. Now I would like you to stay up if the composition of your team changed in the last 6 months. So maybe some people joined the team, maybe some people left, but stay up if the team stay up if the team changed in the last 6 months, and you can sit down if your team was exactly the same 6 months ago. Almost everybody is still up. Now, my last question to you is, was that done on purpose? What I mean by that is, were you part of a reshuffle? If that's the case, stay up. If it's just, again, people joining and leaving just because, organic growth, please just stand down. So stay up if you were part of a big reshuffle, where everybody kind of change on purpose, and stay down if that's just people leaving the team or joining. So we've lost maybe 60% of the room. So what I want to do today basically is get you, and you can stand up. Thank you, everybody. So what I want to do today is get you to think a bit about team structure and why you're changing those teams. More often than not, teams just tend to stay the same for a long period of time, and when they change, it's just because we're hiring people or people need to leave. It's not really done on purpose. It's not really because we think we have to move a lot of people from left to right because new business priorities. So I really want you to think about those trade-offs. I really want you to think about whether this is a good thing to try to optimize for stable teams, or if there are different models. Maybe there are. So really, today, my goal, get you to think about that, because I do think it's almost as important, if not a lot more important, at whatever language or framework you're choosing for building your software. There will be a time for questions at the end, so keep notes, and I will gladly answer. Right, so who am I? My name is Julien Lavigne du Cadet. I'm an engineering manager. I'm French, but I'm living in the UK. I work for a company called G Research. We are forecasting financial markets. We're quite big. There's like 400 engineers working in my company. But what I'm going to talk about today is only what we're doing in roughly 50 of those. And I'm in data engineering, but that's not really relevant. So the plan for today is the following. I'm going to give you a bit of context about where we were like 3 years ago and how we built from that, and try different model. Then I'm going to talk about our current model that we started maybe almost 18 months ago. I'm going to tell you how we track progress in a world where people self-select and decide what they work on. And then finally, I'll have some parting words. Right, so once upon a time, we were in a very classic model, so circa 2015. Basically, the way we were working was pretty much someone had a need, one of our stakeholders, and he was asking the person at the very front of the queue to do some work for him. So maybe that was someone building a UI, maybe that stakeholders wanted a new feature somewhere on some kind of dashboard. And that person would start doing some of the work, but very, very quickly would find that, hey, I need some backend work, and maybe I need some change in the database or something like that. So he would start doing the work, and then he would start coordinating with the next person in the chain. And we went through the various hoops like that. Obviously, that means that somewhere, someone's going to be the bottleneck. And that person is very likely going to be very unhappy because a lot of work to do. Everybody else is like kind of relaxing, making the UI great, whereas he's really, really struggling with work. And what that leads to is a very, very high work in progress. So you have at least as many kind of ticket items, whatever you want to call it, as people in the chain. More often than not, you actually have a lot more because these kind of dependencies start creating cycles, and everybody is blocked on everybody. So that's pretty common way of working, especially when you're a small company. But that leads to, in my mind, quite a lot of significant downside. One of them is bus factor. If any of those people is away for a week or leave the team, etc., everything stops. High work in progress, I mentioned it. And high work in progress, in my mind, is not the best way to get very high throughput and low lead time. And, well, actually, long lead time. So since those features have to go through all those hoops and there's massive queues between all of those hoops, it takes a lot of time to get anything done. So we moved at that point to the next sensible thing, which is kind of product team, which is also a very, very classic model. So in product teams, you get a bunch of people, and you give them end-to-end ownership on some features. And ideally, you really give them a vertical slice, so they go from the UI to the database, everything in between, and they are as autonomous as they can be. And that's a great model. That's a great way to work. However, something that we tend to not be very good at is what if priority change? So, previously the kind of high value or at least high priority backlogs was the bottom one, where you've got the most people. And then suddenly the business decide that, hey, the top one is a lot more important. So what do we do about that? Well, more often than not, nothing happened. So you tend to have all the resources stay at the bottom because we want stable teams. And the guys at the top, the people at the top, they're going to struggle a bit again because they're going to be under-resourced. And it can be worse, because sometimes the business can tell you, hey, I really want all hands on deck on this new feature. Totally forget about whatever you were doing. And that's a bit, that can generate quite a lot of anxiety for the people down, especially maybe you had some kind of tech lead or an engineering manager for the team at the bottom. What does that person become in that new model? The top one already had a leader of engineering manager, so is he just becoming an individual contributor? Well, maybe. I hope you just have a way to deal with that. So that's a good model, but fundamentally the two problem is that it's not very adaptable to changing demand unless you've got very good processes, and I've not seen a lot in that space, to be honest. And it leads to very unequal work distribution. And I'll give you like a true story. I was meeting someone one day with someone that was basically leading a team that was doing the login page for a website. And you're like, well, do you really need a team for the login page? Like, how complicated that thing can be. Well, it turns out, a year ago, they really wanted to build like a new fancy login page. And nobody ever, reassigned those resources. So they had spent the last year basically tweaking exactly the right shade of blue, making, the login page load as quickly as possible, just because, hey, you never give resource back. Once you've got people, you want to keep them. And that's a problem with product team that you can see. So we were not in that position, and really need to be more adaptable. So in 2016, 2017, we decided to switch a bit our model and to go to project teams. So project team, the idea is that you do recognize that priorities are going to change, and so your team are only transient. So you create a few teams, and then at some point in the future, you're going to change to something else. Now, generally, the scope of those teams is decided in advance. So in our case, we didn't necessarily have specifications or whatever, but we had a pretty good idea of what we wanted to achieve. So the scope was kind of fixed, and only the duration of the project was kind of the variable we were playing with. Now that leads to an interesting problem, which is how do you transition from one to the other? Because generally speaking, those projects don't really align. You don't have all of them finishing at the same time. So now you need to start creating those new teams for those new projects by taking people from the current team and moving them to the new team. And that's kind of pretty hard, because this existing team, they don't have like a lot of incentive actually to say that their work is done and move on to something. Software engineers, certainly I was like that, we always want to make the thing a bit more awesome, whatever awesome means. So they're like, oh yeah, we should really refactor that thing before getting done and moving on. So what that leads to is, well, it's hard to compose team. Because as an engineering manager, you kind of have to take into account the skills of everyone to create those teams and assign people. It is really hard to start project and transition. People are always like, oh no, we need more time to do X, Y, Z, and you're not really sure if that's a real thing or not. And basically all the overhead is on the manager. So the manager is some kind of benevolent dictator that say, hey, no, I really need you to move there. And generally when you do that, you find that at the time that you're taking someone and moving it to a new project, that this someone is actually the one person that make the team tick and get the things done in the team. So it's really difficult and a big management nightmare. So that leads me to more than a year ago, early 2018, and my situation at the time was a bit like that, and I will let you read for a second. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Well, it certainly was my case. So yeah, my team was growing, 15 engineers, and we reached 20 later in the year, 10 plus stakeholders, so a big prioritization nightmare, because all of those people wanted very different things done in the system, and like a huge backlog of project. And in terms of kind of technical scope, that is kind of a real eye-level architecture diagram with details removed. But we had like more than 100 pieces of software, full stack, going from well, microservices in C#, Kotlin, still some monolith, some UI, some Spark code, some every kind of database you can imagine, some batch processing, some real-time processing, and even some very random stuff, such as we're the one building hosted Jupyter Notebook and Kubernetes for the whole company. So any one of those pieces could be something that the business say, hey, I would like you to make that better. And that's, again, very hard if you have very stable teams, because you never know exactly where that's going to come. So at that time, I was a bit sad, because A, I feel that people were not really taking as much ownership as I want them to be. And to be fair, if I were moving them from A to B, you could expect them to feel a bit like pawns on the chessboard. So that was not really good. And the second question I had was, how do you scale the team? If we ever need to be more people, like 30, how do we make that happen with that kind of with those kind of constraints? So at that point, took a step back and decided to look at really what we wanted to optimize for. And this is what I've chosen at the time. So the first thing is that we really wanted to optimize for business impact. What I mean by that is that, sure, we're software engineers, but the goal is not to produce software. The goal is to solve some kind of problem. The goal is to move the needle somewhere and make the business better. So I always tell my guy, if you deploy some piece of software to production but nobody is using it, I don't really care. You've not done your job well. So really, first thing is having business impact, deliver value for the business. The second thing, and I've talked about it before, is adaptability to demand. So if we need to put all the team on some specific part of the system to make it better, because that is the highest priority of the moment, we should be able to do that as much as possible. The third thing is growing people, so optimizing for learning. Some people will be expert in Spark, some people will be expert in UIs, some people may want to lead, and all of those people may want to learn different skills. Maybe for, it's long-term commitment, maybe someone want to really build, like for the next year, some very in-depth Spark knowledge, or maybe they just want to try something different for 3 months. And all of that is fine, and I think we should really optimize for that. The fourth thing is sharing learnings, especially if you've got a team that gets bigger and bigger. How do you apply what works on the left side to the right-hand side of the system? That's a very, very important thing. Otherwise, if you don't have any cross-pollination, you tend to have like local optimum, and you never really can reapply those best practice to other parts. And the two last one, a bit more personal, but I was a big believer in self-organization, especially if you want to scale the team. I can't be the kind of bottleneck deciding on everything. So how do you get people to kind of select what they want to work on and really be autonomous? And finally, why do I want to do that? Because I can really scale myself and remove myself from the day-to-day operations and those kind of decisions. I can do other things that are more valuable for the business. The other thing that was really important for me, and it's coming from a book called Drive from Dan Pick, which I really, really recommend. And Dan Pick's hypothesis is basically that there are three main things that lead to very high intrinsic motivation for people. Autonomy, basically, you have everything you need to work, you don't depend on a lot of people. Mastery, you build skills in an area that you care about. And purpose, you know why you're working on that thing. And those three things, if you get those three of them, the hypothesis is that you get very, very motivated people. So, can we build something that basically optimizes for those three things? So at that point, I had a lot of inspirations. There's a lot of people doing different things, and those are three out of many that I've selected for this talk. But one that I thought was very interesting is kind of circa 2011 or 2012, I never remember, Valve Software, which is the company behind Steam and Half-Life and all those great games, published, or at least leaked, their handbook for new employees. And there was something that was very interesting and I thought was absolutely crazy at the time. Basically, for every new joiner, they give them a desk with wheel. Why do you give a desk with wheel? So that people can take their desk, move it in any other room, and start working on whatever they want. So people never get assigned to a project. You pick what you think is the most important thing for the company. So I thought that was quite crazy at the time, but a very interesting idea nevertheless. Then you've got people like Lego that have planning day with like 150 people. They get 150 people in the room for 1 or 2 days, and again, those people just decide what the next 3 months are going to look like. And last but not least was Dan North, which is very known figure in the kind of agile space. And I've been working with him for the last year or 18 months on the kind of thing we're doing right now. And he's got a lot of very interesting idea on how to scale agile to the next levels. Right. So that led us to our current system of work that I call continuous reteaming. And I don't know if you've got engineering managers or engineering leaders in the room, but what I can tell you is that this is the part that gets very, very uncomfortable for you. Basically, this is the part where us, as engineering manager, we have to change instead of asking other people to do all the change for us. And that's kind of a leap of faith, and I'm sure you will know why in a few minutes. One disclaimer is that obviously we didn't come with all of that on day one. This is an iteration, and I'm sure will change a lot in the future. Right, so it all started with a planning day, and the idea of the planning day, similar to Lego, is very simple. We take all the demand side, all the people that want work done, and we take all the supply side, which is all the people who are actually going to do the work. We put all those people in the room, we shake, and some magic happen, and at the end of the day, we can have new teams and new plan for the next 3 months. So how does that work in practice? Well, the first step is that we're going to need some kind of recipe for the day, and I'm going to go quickly through that, and I'll give a bit more detail. So we start with breakfast with all the people who are going to be part of this big exercise. So we did that with up to 50 people. And why do we do that? Just to build a relationship, because software is a lot more, building software is a lot more than writing code. It's actually about creating empathy, understanding the needs, and finding out what people want. Then we're going to move to the last quarter achievements. And the reason why we do that is just to kind of start the day on a positive note. You probably did quite a lot of very positive things, and it's time to celebrate success. The third thing we do is we get all the demand side to pitch for what they need. So what are the features or things that they really want us to achieve in the next 3 months? Then we're going to have lunch, and this is really good because people will actually start to talk about those needs and, again, build more relationship and find out a bit more informally. We're going to have constrained presentation. So people are going to choose what they work on and totally self-organize around that work. To do that, we need some constraints. And those constraints are there to enable self-selections. And I'll mention a bit more about that later. And then finally, we're going to have the real workshop part of the exercise, which is people are just going to create those teams and build a quarterly plan without any involvement from management. At the end of the day, we present the plan, and then celebrate again because that was very intense. Right, so we need some ingredients before the day actually starts, otherwise it's not going to succeed. What are those? Well, the first thing is that we need to know what are the priorities. So we need some kind of pre-planning, which is what are the top N projects that the company wants us to focus for the next 3 months. So I'm not going to talk about how you achieve that, but it's really important. You need some kind of merged portfolio of projects beforehand. Then the second thing you need is gather the people. So as I mentioned before, we need the demand side, which is going to be stakeholders, program managers, or product managers, product owner, whatever you're calling them in your own company. So the people that represent the customers. And then the supply side. So in our case, most likely software engineers, system engineers, any kind of ops person. And some of those people may actually also be on the demand side, because it's totally fine to say, one of our goals might be to, make some kind of internal system better for the sake of software engineers to work just faster. Then you're going to need a very, very big room with a lot of space on the wall, because you're going to have a lot of post-it all over the place to organize the work, and as much as possible, far from the office. The reason why is that you really want people to be there, focus on the day. This is very intense. We need everyone. If it's in your building, there's a big chance that people might come and go because they've got a meeting or something, and you're going to lose a lot of value. And then we need the constraint that I mentioned before. And the constraints are really going to be the rule of the game. This is the minimum set of rules that you want to give your people to basically avoid chaos and have an outcome for the day that you're going to be happy with. So let me give you some example, because otherwise that's very theoretical. So our constraints are the following. We want all work to be picked or deprioritized. What we mean by that is that it's not because something is not really interesting for anyone that we don't recognize that this might be very high priority. So everything needs to be picked. Or if really nobody wants to do it, then you should have a conversation with the stakeholders and they decide if that gets deprioritized. Or maybe there is too much work. In practice, there's always too much work. So it's really the stakeholders that will decide to remove something. Otherwise, everything needs to be picked. We want team size between 3 and 6. Below 3, we think a team is just too small and it's not really a team because people will be on holidays or on support or whatever, and you will always end up with weeks with one person. And we also try to not have 2 big teams just because communication doesn't scale linearly, and we think things is a good tipping point. And the third thing is that sometimes you've got projects that obviously don't end up on a 3-month period. So every 3 months we have options to decide on whether we continue doing that project or not. And at the end of the 3 months, basically, if we decide to continue for an extra 3 months, a team will be most likely a continuation from a previous team. So we want to have some change, but not everything change. So at least one person from the team must leave, and at least one person from outside must join the team. And that mostly because we want to have this idea of cross-pollination, and we also want to have what are considered the most exciting or interesting projects to have give opportunity for people to join those if they want to. And another constraint is maybe you want to have 20% of your time spent on tech debt reduction. That's fine, you can do that, no worries. So now let's go through some of the detailed instruction to get that day to work and people to self-organize. So as I mentioned before, one of the very important things is to present the last quarter achievement and really celebrate about all the good work that has been done. So we spent roughly 5 minutes per team. And the really important kind of guideline is you want to focus on impact. Remember my slide about business impact. How did you move the needle? How did you make things better for someone? Do you have numbers? Is it like, do you have new customers? Do you reduce load time, etc.? How can you demonstrate that you did something great? And again, this is not about deploying the software in staging in production. This is really about satisfying someone's needs, which are two different things. The second thing is that, is there anything still in progress or left to do that should feed into the new quarter? And the third thing is that really you want to make that day, those presentations very, very fun. And those are kind of real slides from some of my guys. It will be the beginning of the day. It's really, really important, as I said before, to recognize all the good work that has been done. We don't do that enough. And B, if you make it fun, applause and celebrate, that will prime everyone for the full day and kind of energize people. The second big part of the day is the demand side pitch. So here we want stakeholders to spend roughly 15 minutes presenting the things they want done. So, what is the context? Why does it matter? What is the expected business impact? Why do you want to do that work now and not, in 3 months or 6 months? Why does that? Why is it a priority at the moment? Another thing that is really important is that stakeholders will have this grand vision for where they want to go, and that's more often what they will present to you. But what is a great quarter? Do ask them that question, and the answer generally is very, very different because stakeholders do realize that things take time. So if you ask them that question, that will prime them to actually give you a very different answer. And maybe they want 1 million new subscribers, but they realize that nothing is there. So actually, starting with 10,000 in 3 months would be actually great. And what you want to have is time for question and answers. And actually what we find out is that stakeholders actually tend to ask questions to themselves because coordination across those is not necessarily super high. So some of the stakeholders find out about what other stakeholders want at that time. So it's actually quite interesting. And obviously you will take notes, post-its on everything that people want, just put them on the wall, and that will be useful for the afternoon. So how does this afternoon work? So that's the part where we do self-selection. So that's the part where people would just take the work, move it, so the post-it at least that represent the work, and group them in what they think is meaningful groupings. And then they will assign themselves to one of those groups and will form what is called slam teams. And we'll do that basically until all the constraints are satisfied. So SLAM team stands for self-managed, lean, audacious, and multidisciplinary. So the idea is just, back to Dan picked, that you really want to create as much as possible an autonomous team, as in a team that will have almost no dependency or as little dependencies as possible. And you really want them to, as much as possible, also aim for, doing really, really great work. Not just, hey, let's do something that is okay, but how can we aim high? And those teams will fill some kind of template, and basically the expected outcome for the day is going to be: we want a team to have a name. We want to know who is part of the team. We want to know what is the mission. What are you trying to do in the next 3 months? Who are your stakeholders? How much capacity do you have? Like, especially, is there some people are on holiday for a month? We should take that into account. And we want to have SWAGs, which stands for Scientific Well Let's Guess, which is just some totally finger-in-the-air estimate just to try to see if the amount of work that we think we have for the quarter is in any way achievable, or sometimes we actually don't have enough work. So we should know that. The last two things are risk and dependencies. Who do you depend on? Do you know about some specific risk that may slow down your project? And draft OKRs. This is not a talk about OKRs, but OKRs are really, really important in our system of work. So I'll just give you like a 30-second presentation on those. OKRs stand from Objective and Key Results, and there is a great book from John Doerr that basically brought that system at Google. Objective is really some kind of moonshot, the great thing you want to achieve. And key result is going to be the way you measure whether you are getting close to achieving that or not. So you measure it from a scale from 0 to 1. Back to our self-election, self-organization. So as I mentioned, we'll have iteration all the afternoon. So people would just, as I said, move the post-it around, discuss all together, put their name somewhere. And one of the very important things there is that we really want the duration of this iteration to be kind of shorter and shorter. And that's because we want some kind of, build some sense of urgency and get the people to really solve the problem. So after each iteration, basically, we ask ourselves this question, which is, have we met the constraint that we've exposed to the team? No? Well, adapt team. And here, what is very, very difficult as an engineering manager is that you generally want to jump in and try to solve the problem yourself. But actually, the only thing you have to do is just highlight the problem. Do nothing else. Trust me, people want to do the right thing. They care about success of your teams or company. So they will actually start making the required adjustment. If the constraints are met, the next question we ask ourselves is there too much work somewhere? Do we need to rebalance team? Yes, if we need, again, new iteration. No, in that case, the last question we ask ourselves is, do we have any main concerns, especially coming from the stakeholders? And one of those, for example, could be maybe, I've got a team that is going to work on some kind of super hard to work with backend, and all the people that are part of the team are only UI developer, or the other way around. So if that's the case, maybe the stakeholders might be a bit concerned that he's not going to get anything done in the next quarter, and that's fine to raise that. So at that point, if everybody is satisfied, great, we've got our planning for the day, and we can just share with the role room and go celebrate. There are a few things that we've not achieved at that point, and it's really, really important to recognize it. The first one is that we've not built a static plan. We have to recognize that things will change. So we're not saying that, this is what will happen for the 3 months, and nothing could make us change our mind. Well, actually, if someone come up tomorrow with these great new priorities and has the whole business to realign towards it, we'll have to deal with that. In practice, that's not often the case, at least for us, so that's good. But we still have, some things we need to adapt to. So one of the things we do on a regular basis, actually have a team, some kind of business-as-usual team that is kind of buffering everybody else from that. But there are other different models. The second thing that we've not done yet is choosing a delivery lead, and I'll explain in a minute what that is. And the third thing is finalizing the OKRs. So the OKRs are really, really central because this is really the North Star for the team. So you want to spend the required time to get them right. So the first 2 days of every quarter, we basically do almost only that, is making sure we all align on what success looks like. There's a few things I've learned the hard way, doing that for almost 18 months. And the first one is that how you introduce this new system of work does matter a lot. Especially, we had quite a lot of resistance from stakeholders to come for a one-day offsite. And, well, I understand why, but it's really important for people to also realize that if they want, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working on, the part of the system they care about for 3 months, that is a very, very big commitment. They should reciprocate and have a very similar commitment themselves. Because if they can't spend that time with us trying to figure out, what does great look like, how are we going to get there? So it's really important to have that conversation. And really need to be there. Every time we had some, proxy person instead of stakeholders, we always wasted a lot of time and spent the next 2 days just re-engaging with the real stakeholders, trying to find out what they really needed. So time lost for everybody. The other thing that I learned the hard way, and that's probably the most important one, is that the kind of command and control culture spirit mindset is very difficult to to fight against. So basically, if your engineering managers are not bought into the idea, what will happen is that they will preform team. So before the quarterly planning, they will talk to their guy and say, hey, it would be so great if you could do that. And with that kind of way of saying it, that leads you to believe that you don't really have any choice. So that's extremely hard, and really, if you're in this situation and want to try something like that, I would say, well, don't engage with those teams. Let them aside, because that's just going to fail. They're going to spend a day wondering why they're doing all of that stuff, because they will have a totally different cycle to planning and team formations. But that being said, so was that a success for us? So this is a survey I run in my team, and very simple question, which is, do you want to do that again next quarter? Yes or no? And almost everybody agreed, and I had one person that was like neutral, whatever, I don't care. So I take that as a success. Though, to be fair, and that's back to my command and control slide, we've widened the group and did it also with more people that were not really doing everything, well, I would say by the book. I'm not sure there's a book on that, but which were doing this kind of preform team. And their result was very different. Like, the people were like, well, it's a bit weird to go to this planning day when we don't really have a choice to decide what we work on. So what are the downside? Well, one very difficult thing that we're not solving is how do we deal with long-term product ownership. Since people are moving around quite a lot, that is a problem. The second thing is that I think this model actually only works with software that fits in your head. And what I mean by that is kind of microservices. If you've got a big monolith, it's very, very difficult to kind of self-organize and have very autonomous team around that, because your build is always going to be broken, because you're going to want to change some part of the system, and someone else depends on that, so you're going to slow them down, etc. And the third thing, as I said, is that it's really a leap of faith. It's really a different way to manage people and work, so you have to just jump in if you want to. So at the beginning of the quarter, we have to form the teams, so get people together. We actually change the seating arrangement every quarter. And we have to get a delivery lead. So the delivery lead is almost like your product owner for the team, if you want. So it will be someone that is part of a team. For us, is software engineers, and his mission is going to make sure the team stay focused on whatever is the North Star. It will be the primary person to communicate with stakeholders, but not necessarily the only one. It's just if nobody does it, it will be. And that person is not a tech lead, in the sense it's not the same role as a tech lead. So it can be your tech lead if you have that, but it doesn't have to be. Basically, those two roles are fundamentally different. And I gave some details about exactly what we get that person to do, but it's a lot of focus on the OKRs and making sure people are working on the right thing. Since we're all about self-selection and self-organization, actually, the delivery lead is elected by the team member. And one of the very interesting things I found is that, in my experience, very few software engineers want to be become project manager, program manager, whatever you want to call it. Some do, but not that many. In my world, everybody wants to become a delivery lead. And I think one of the reasons why that is the case is because this is not a commitment. You basically give the role to someone for 3 months, and then he can decide if he likes it or not. But yeah, it's not like a career change. It's just like a temporary thing. So how do we track progress with those teams changing every quarter? So back to the OKRs. As I said, they're very, very important. And every Monday morning, all the delivery lead, myself, and a few other people gather, and we're going to update the OKRs. Updating the OKRs means 2 things for us. It is updating the score. So, have we achieved some of our OKRs in a measurable way? Yes, great, update the score. But more often than not, it's quite difficult to update the score because some things are quite binary, or some things start moving actually quite late in the quarter. And that's all right. So actually, we spend most of our time updating our confidence level that we're going to reach that OKR. And that is a very, very interesting conversation, because what happens more often than not is that you'll get some of your delivery lead that will tell you something like, hey, we're totally on track, we are going to make the last few commits this week, and then we should be able to deploy, and it's all fine. Confidence level, 70%. And in your mind, like, hold on, you tell me you're totally on track, it's all fine, where are the 30% going? Oh yeah, actually, we also depend on that team, and we don't have an ETA from them. Right, okay, so now we're starting to get very meaningful conversation. So there are different things that could happen with those confidence level, such as this one. Another one could be, hey, there is 0% chance we're going to achieve that thing. Why? Well, it could be because we just have no idea how to do it. You thought it was possible at the beginning of the quarter, but actually, we've exhausted our ideas. Or it could be we just discard it entirely, and we recognize that as quickly as possible. So we've got those conversations on a weekly basis to try to update everybody. And we talk about other things, such as team health, how is everybody doing? Do we need to move work from one side to the other? Because maybe one team is going very, very well, while another is struggling. So that's our weekly rhythm. Right, so a few parting words for you. Most of us, I suspect, would say, we're working in some kind of agile environment. But what I hear, or at least what I see most of the time, is that agile really means that, you've got some bubbles of agility. My team is agile because my team is doing Scrum or XP or Kanban or whatever. But the next layer tends to be, pretty much command and control. You still have, your engineering manager, your PM, someone that's kind of, directing work at you or, directing resource at you. So, is there a way to take back control and be a bit more globally agile? Are we doing agile at the wrong level? Should we do agile, primarily at the next level and not at the team level? And the other thing, and I mentioned that before, is how do we optimize for these intrinsic motivations, which I really, really think are essential and more important than many technical decisions we're doing regularly. So what I think is that self-organization, self-selections, and focusing on the business impact enable those drivers. So if I just dig a bit more into that, self-organization. Well, it's really similar to autonomy in the sense if you can get everything you need and all the skills that you need in your team, that will lead to very high autonomy. Self-selection is important because now you can choose what technical skills, or actually not even technical, what soft skill you develop on one side, but also it feeds into purpose. If you can pick out of many topics the one that you care about the most, that helps for your purpose motivation. And the third one is, if you start phrasing your objectives in terms of business impact instead of a very long list of to-do list that someone has written on some kind of Java ticket, that will give you a lot of autonomy to decide how you do things, and more importantly, you will hopefully really understand the purpose, because it's not about just doing those tasks. It's about enabling something bigger. So I think that's really important. I think that model is kind of better aligned with those motivation driver. And I guess my kind of challenge to you is, as I said, we all like to say that we're working in an agile team, but in my mind, agile is a lot about experimenting, trying new things. So my challenge to you is kind of go back to your teams, think about your system of work, think about whether it works for you, whether this or the right trade-off. And if you think they're not entirely the right trade-off, well, maybe try different things. Maybe revisit your system of work and try some of the ID todays and try to be a bit more empowered. And on that, thank you very much, and I will now take any questions. Yeah, so the question is, did I heard about Scale Agile framework? Yes, I did. There's SAFe, there's LESS, there's a few of those. I can't say I've practiced any of those. Is that your questions? Yeah, so the remark sounds very similar to safe. I don't think it is, if I'm honest, because, for example, safe has the idea of release train. We don't have that. We release on a daily basis. We actually release 100 times on average per week. So we don't have release train, which is one of those things. Sure, there are some similarities, but I guess one of the big difference is that we actually don't follow a framework per se, in the sense this is a snapshot of what we do, and in the same way that Spotify kind of presented their Spotify model a few years ago, it was actually just a snapshot and it's evolving. So we're not really trying to follow a specific framework, and I think there is a lot more latitude for us to change things. I'm also not really aware, in the case of Safe, of people really choosing what they work on. I think it is a lot more about, hey, there is high-level work is split and sent to those teams, and then those teams stay the same. So I'm sure some people might do something like that, but I don't think anything about Safe says, for example, reorg your team on a quarterly basis and get different people. But again, I didn't work in a Safe environment, so that's just from reading about it. Yes? Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question is, how do you do that if you've got different offices in different time zones? The honest answer is I don't know, and give it a try and share that with me or with the community at large. My guess is that time zone difference will make it very different. So you would probably indeed split it into 3. At that point, one of the questions, at least one thing that would wonder anyway, is how much dependency do you want to have in these offices, because jet lag make it super difficult to do work. So one of the models I've seen that works well, each of the offices is actually working as much as possible on totally independent things with their own set of stakeholders. In that case, just do that in each independent office. If that's not the case, well, yeah, you're going to struggle, and you probably need to get people at some point or another together in a room. So maybe not do it, every 3 months, but every 6 months, something like that, because connecting those people together is actually probably quite a good thing anyway. So maybe worth trying, I would say. Yes? Okay, so the first question was, what is the percentage of the team members that stay in the same team every quarter? It depends, quarter to quarter. So generally, when a team is a continuation and is what I would call full staff, like we've got 6 people, we generally have 1 or 2 people that change every quarter. And more often than not, actually works well, because, as I said, one of the questions you should ask yourself is, do I have someone that has 3 weeks of holiday, and then maybe 2 weeks of support? So basically, that person is going to be off the project for half the time anyway. So if that's the case, maybe that person actually do recognize that would be better suited for him or her to do something entirely different for this quarter. But sometimes we've got project that totally stop and team that reform. So 100% of the team is just totally new. So that was the first question. And your second question, can you please repeat it? Yes, what is the cost of context switching? Very good question. I'm not sure I know how to measure that. The question I would ask is, what is the cost of not working on the most important thing? Opportunity cost. And how does those 2 things balance? It is hard to say. What I found, and it's just my experience, is that by doing that, actually people start building a better understanding of the whole system, not just a tiny part. And actually, especially when you're starting doing microservices, the complexity is between the parts. It's not within each of those microservices. So you always have people that kind of specialize in one area, no matter what you do. So you've got some domain expertise, but with a system like that, you actually have more people that start connecting the dots and can optimize a bit more widely. But I can't measure, I don't have measure to share about that. It's just my observations. Yes? Yep. So okay, so the question is, how do you deal with, first question is, how do you deal with production support? So the 100 components is just the one that are owned by my team of 20 people, and there's actually like a wider ecosystem. What we do is we've got 2 people constantly on support rotation, just to kind of tackle Unequal and fixing small bugs and things like that. So actually having people that move around help us building that understanding. We invest quite a lot of time in making systems better. So some of those projects would actually be, decrease the numbers of outage observed per whatever quarter, month or something. So we'll have people focusing on that for 3 months and starting also building run books about how to manage a system. But that's not perfect. And in practice, you may be on support and something break and you generally don't know anything about how to fix it. If that's the case, well, you'll go talk to someone that do know and get that person to help you a bit. Thankfully, we're not so much in that situation. Mostly because we've invested in our system and migrated from big monoliths to a lot of microservices where it's a lot easier to understand what's going on because the context is a lot smaller. So sorry, that was your first question and I forgot the second one. Oh, cohesion. Yeah, so how do you deal with cohesion? How do you share knowledge and those kind of things? Well, there are different things. Again, actually having people move from one part of the system to the other does help in the sense with enough time you build a good understanding of everything. Another thing we do is that for new joiners, at some point they will actually spend a month doing what we call secondary support, which is just going through the backlog of all the small things, and that will expose them to quite a lot of the part of the system. Not all of them, but at least the ones that are breaking the most, which is really what we want, because the ones that are kind of super stable, it's very unlikely that tomorrow you'll have something entirely new that will break. So that's something we do. One other thing we do, which I did not mention, is that actually every 2 weeks we've got some kind of internal demos within the team just to share, what are the new things that have been built, the new features that have been changed, or any kind of interesting technical discussion. So that's another way we kind of build that knowledge and share it. But back to your point, is it perfect? No, certainly not. Ultimately, you need to invest in your system to make them less prone to errors. And you need to build run books so that when something breaks in the middle of the night, someone can just, as much as possible, follow a recipe of what needs to be solved. And sometimes, very rarely, sometimes that's not good enough, and the person on call doesn't know the answer, and that person would call someone else in the team. But that happens once every, 3 to 6 months for us. So it's okay. I'm happy with that trade-off. Any other question? Yes? Yeah, okay. So just, yeah, people, please, time is up, so feel free to leave, and do answer on the app. You know, do not the talk, please. That would be super useful feedback. So back to your question. So basically, how do we deal with people that want to stick together or work with the superstar, or quite the opposite, people that want to split? Well, splitting is super easy in the sense people will just naturally, you know, break the team if it doesn't work. So it's actually a nice way to solve a more systemic problem. I think one of the things I've seen over the last 18 months is that as an engineering manager, you think you know it all, and you think you're the right person to make a lot of choice about team composition. Actually, you are totally biased. You're totally biased because you always have people that you prefer over each other. You prefer working on some kind of software. For example, I always prefer kind of greenfield microservices things, etc. So it's super easy to basically project that on everybody else and say, well, if I want to work on microservices, everybody else won't. Or if I want to work with that person, everybody else won't work with that person. That is not true. In my experience, that is actually very, very far from the truth. And we have some people that actually love working on super legacy, crappy software. And the reason why is because if they manage to do this very small tweak, it will have like a super big impact on the whole system. Because if it's legacy, it means it's used by a lot of people and teams. So basically, what you're describing, in my opinion, is not really a problem. People just tend to self-organize and do what is right. And that's why we've got this rule that we need at least some change in the team to kind of also enforce that if everybody wants to work on that part of the system, well, every quarter there will be at least one slot, possibly more, open for people to work in there. But just last quarter, we had a project presented by stakeholders. I can guarantee at the beginning of the quarterly planning, I was like, nobody will work on that. Well, I had 3 of my top performers that just jump on it and say, well, yeah, this is all legacy software, we hate it, but we really, really want to solve that problem, actually because it has been so annoying for the last 2 years. So let's do it. So you always are surprised by what people want to do quarter after quarter. Any other questions? No, thank you. I will be around, so feel free to grab me later today if you want. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody.